Hello and welcome to episode 2 of this series. In this episode, we're going to talk about form validation with Zod and React Hook Form. A very interesting topic because it kind of, allows us to see the integration of two technologies, Zod for user input validation and React Hook Form for creating strong forms in React. The good news is that if you're interested in this topic, there is another, complete playlist about this topic on the channel that is going to teach you a lot about form validation with Zod and React Hook Form. If you're motivated, if you're enthusiastic about learning this topic, make sure to check out that playlist. But in this episode, the plan is to create a form, use our schema to validate the data that the user is going to enter into the form fields that we have in our application. So the objectives: we are going to integrate Zod with React Hook Form. We are going to validate book data on the client side. We are going to show error messages directly in the UI if the data that the user has entered is invalid. And we're going to use inferred types with Zod schemas in our form logic. So let's get started. First off, I want to install React Hook Form and React and Hook Form resolvers. And I want to talk about these in detail here. What are these? If you're not familiar with React Hook Form, no worries, because I'm going to explain everything in full detail. And of course, Hook Form resolvers that kind of allows us to integrate React Hook Form with Zod. So we're going to install React Hook Form and Hook Form resolvers. But before we do that, I want to talk about these two a little bit. So React Hook Form, this is the main library for building forms in React. And there are so many advantages to using this library for creating forms in React compared to writing a form from scratch yourself. So what it does is that it makes it easy to build forms without writing a lot of boilerplate code. It handles form state validation and submission efficiently. It's very fast and lightweight, so no re-rendering on every keystroke. It makes your application amazingly fast. So example benefit: instead of writing, for example, 10 different use state calls for each input, you let React Hook Form to manage all of it with just a few lines of code. If you're new to React, you probably know that when we want to create forms, we need to create states, local states for every field in our form. That becomes a little bit unmaintainable and tedious after a while. By using React Hook Form, you can manage your forms much more effectively. What about React Hook Form resolvers? This, as I said, is like a bridge or adapter that allows you to kind of connect the form that you are creating using React Hook Form with external validation libraries like Zod in this case. So again, what it does is that it allows you to plug Zod into your form for your validation, and this can help you to, again, reuse the schema that you have defined with Zod to validate the data that the user enters into the form. Without this package, again, you would need to do it yourself. So you would need to manually validate with Zod, and for example, save parse that we saw in the previous episode after the form has submitted. But with this, React Hook Form does that automatically for you. So let me go ahead now. This is my app running in my browser. Episode number 1, I have committed the changes. I'm going to create a new branch called episode 2. And I am going to install. Let me kill this instance of my terminal. And okay, let me go ahead and install React Hook Form and Hook Form resolvers. So those are installed now. Why React Hook Form plus Zod for validation? So React Hook Form, as I said, is great for performance and flexibility. It supports schema validation libraries like Zod via a concept called resolver, which we will explore in detail. So this gives you form state management, declarative forms, form errors, as well as TypeScript integration with Zod. So it's like a very efficient and effective combination using React Hook Form for your forms plus Zod for validation. Now let's go ahead and create this page, add book. So this is a page we're going to create, and we are using React Hook Forms for creating the form. As you can see here, this is coming from, React Hook Form. And of course, this is the import that we've got for that, right? And then we are, of course, using the schema that we defined in the previous episode, book schema, to infer our type. This is what we discussed in the previous episode. One of the advantages of using Zod is to infer a type based on the schema. So infer TypeScript type from Zod schema. And then we are using the book form data, as you can see here, in our use form to create a form based on that type. I am going to explain everything here, guys, in full detail. I am going to talk about the things that the use form returns and the fact that you can use these to build your form. But before I do that, before I go through the code one line at a time, let me go ahead and add this add book page. So here I've got to create this pages folder, add book.tsx, and I am going to write the code for this form. So importing use form and Zod resolver, importing my schema, importing Z from Zod, inferring my type based on the schema we created in the previous episode, and now creating the component or page. Using use form to create a form based on that type, book form data, and then creating the onSubmit. I'm going to talk about onSubmit, by the way. And then the template itself. So it's going to be a form with different form fields. For title, you remember the schema of a book, the author, and the year. So for each form field, I'm going to render an input, and I am going to render any potential errors in there for the author, for title, and for year. There are so many things to discuss in this piece of code. I want you to understand everything in full detail before I wrap up this episode. I'm going to save this and take you back to the notes. I want to discuss every single line. So let's understand what this code does section by section. First off, I'm importing Zod resolver. So this is, as I said, like a bridge, a connection between Zod as the library that is doing data validation for you, and React Hook Form as the library that is helping you to create your forms. So it tells React Hook Form to use your Zod schema to validate form data. Without this, you'd have to write custom validation logic for each input yourself. Now, the next import is for the schema itself. So this imports the schema we defined in the previous episode. It kind of, creates the shape and rules for the book form. Title must be a string, year must be a number, author must be a string as well. The next one is the import for Zod. So this brings in the Z object used to create or work with Zod schemas. You're not building a new schema here, but you're about to extract its type or infer the type that the schema represents. Now, this is new. Take a look at this piece of code. So this line kind of infers a TypeScript type from the Zod schema. We've got this schema. We are telling Zod to infer the type that this schema represents and to capture that inside of this book form data. It ensures that the book form data, your form's data structure, matches exactly what the schema expects. 3 properties, 2 of them are of type string, 1 of them is of type number. That way your form stays in sync with validation logic. So if, down the road you decide to change your schema, you'd have to make minimal changes to your form because the data validation and everything else is built into the schema. Your type is inferred based on your schema and your form is in sync with your schema. Now, let's look at this portion of the code. Let's take a look at this one. Again, this one is also new. This is the core setup. We are using use form as a hook coming from React Hook Form. So use form, book form schema. book form data. This is the type that we just inferred, right? So this sets up a form expecting a book form data type as the shape of data that the form is supposed to work with. Then we are using Zod resolver book schema, right? This tells the form, use this Zod schema to validate all input fields. This is the schema. So, I mean, in the object that you are passing to this use form hook, you are specifying a resolver. And the resolver is going to be a Zod resolver that you imported with the type of your schema. You remember we imported Zod schema here? We imported Zod resolver, not schema. So we're using this, we're passing the schema to it, and we are defining our resolver for the use form hook, right, in this object that we're passing to this, use form. So that was it. Now the book form data ensures that TypeScript knows what fields to expect with auto completion and type checking. And then Zod handles validation at runtime, while the infer type, as I said, helps you at compile time. Now, what we get out of this, use form hook, we get register, handle submit, form state, errors. Let's talk about them. Register is like a hook to connect each input to the form system. I'm going to show you how register is used in our input elements in our form. Handle submit is a function to run when the form is submitted, and errors is an object that holds any validation errors associated with those inputs. Now, before moving further, let's explore what React hook form does for us. What is use form? I told you, use form is a hook. I hope you're familiar with this concept of hooks in React. If not, there is this playlist where I have talked about hooks, props, and states. I highly recommend watching that course. So, use form is a hook from React hook form library. A hook is a special function in React that helps you manage state and side effects in your components. And use form gives you everything you need to build and manage a form easily, like inputs, validation, errors, submission handling, and so on. What does this code do again? This is the most important part of the code, I guess. So here we're calling the use form hook, and we're extracting three very important things from use form. These three things. Register. Register, this is a function that connects your input fields to your React hook form. When you write register title, you're telling React hook form to track this input under the name title. Take a look at the code we're using. For example, for this input, this is the input, right? We're using register title. So we're connecting this input to the title field or title property of our type, the type that this form is supposed to, work with. So when you write register title, you're telling React hook form to track this input under the name title. React hook form will now manage its value and state automatically. You do not need to create states for this input. It watches for any changes, and it handles validation for this field. Validation based on your schema. And the same thing happens for other fields as well. The next thing that we get from the use form hook is handle submit. Let's talk about handle submit. Handle submit is a function that wraps your form's submit event. When the user clicks submit to submit the form, React hook form, it's going to collect all of the input data. It's going to validate them, right, using the resolver that we specified and the schema. And if everything is valid, it calls your onSubmit function with the data. If there are errors, it prevents submission and stores the errors so you can show them. And the last thing that we get from the use form is formState.errors. This is an object that is holding the validation errors associated with each input field in your form. So for example, if the user leaves the title field empty, which is required based on our schema, errors.title will contain details about that problem. And as you saw, for example, below this input for title, we are showing errors.title. If errors.title has any value, go ahead and render error.title.message. in a paragraph with this class name. And of course, you can add CSS classes for that. So you can use this to display helpful error messages near the inputs so the users know what to do to fix the error. What about this parameter, resolver? And we are assigning a Zod resolver with our schema in here. So the book form data part tells React hook form what the shape or type of your form data looks like. This is the type that we inferred based on our schema. So the resolver, Zod resolver book schema connects Zod validation rules to the React hook form. This means that React hook form asks Zod to check if the input is valid, and you do not have to manually write your validation logic. Again, I told you if you want to know more about React hook form, there's this playlist that I have created. You can find it on my channel, A Coder's Journey, and watch that playlist. So now that we have kind of, talked about this important, block of code and what this use form, hook returns for us, these three, two of them are functions like register and handle submit. The last one is an object. Now let's go ahead and talk about the rest of the code. So yeah, let's continue by checking out this portion of the code. This is the portion of the code responsible for handling the submission of the form. When the form is successfully submitted, so data entered by the user is valid, this function will run, and it's just going to log the data to console. So the data is going to be of type book form data, the type that we inferred, and yeah, it's going to take this as input, as an input parameter, and it's going to log that to console. Now the next portion, the inputs. So we're going to have an input for title. We're going to use that register function to connect that with the title property of our type. And then if there are errors on errors.title, we're going to have a paragraph to show errors.title.message. Register title connects this input to React hook form. If there's an error like empty title, it shows the error message from Zod. Now let's look at the next one. Again, the same logic, because author is of type string as well. The next one is for the number. This one is a little bit different. The type is going to be number. Register is going to connect this input to year, and value as number, it's going to be true, and then we're going to show the errors. Now value as number true tells React hook form to convert the input into a number instead of a string. And then of course we've got some error messages to show to the user inside of this paragraph if the data inside of this property is not valid. Finally, we've got this button, the button that submits the form. So this triggers the form submission, and when we submit the form, that function is going to kick in to kind of handle the submission of the form. Now let's go ahead and add this add book to our app component. So here in my app component, you remember this code, right? This is the code that we wrote in the previous episode. Now I want to write this piece of code in there. So I'm going to remove all of this code now, the code that we wrote in the previous episode, and I want to write the code for the app component. And of course, we need to export default function to get the application running. Now let's get to the notes. So let's run the app and test Zod validation in the form. Let's leave all fields empty to see if Zod will validate the form. Enter the text for some piece of string for year, and enter invalid data or valid data to see what is going to happen in the in the application. So I'm going to add the book. As you can see, I'm getting paragraphs for the different issues. I'm going to put some title here. The paragraph goes away, and then here, and then for year, if I go ahead and enter some incorrect value, invalid value, I'm going to get the issue, the error. And if I go to my console, And if I click add book, I'm going to get the console log here with title, with author, and with year. So you'll see, an example of valid submission, and you will get, this in the output. And that was it. That was it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Again, if that's the case, make sure to give this video a like and stay tuned for the upcoming videos. In this episode, we kind of discussed how we can connect Zod as our data validation library and React Hook Form as the library we use to create flexible, strong forms without writing a lot of boilerplate. And those work well together. You can integrate them easily using resolvers. And again, that's a great combination. And if you want to know more about the topic of this episode, again, as I told you before, there is this playlist on the channel that you can watch, A Coder's Journey. That playlist specifically talks about how you can connect Zod with React Hook Form. This episode number 2, was dedicated to this topic. And from episode 3, we're going to talk about other stuff. But if you want to dive deep into this topic, just check out that playlist that I just talked about. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this episode, and I will see you in the next one.